year 2241, 80 years after the bombs fell and reshaped the world into a twisted wasteland of radiation and ruin, a small tribal village called Arroyo faced its greatest crisis. The village, founded by the legendary vault dweller who had saved California from the Master's army decades before, now struggled against a terrible drought that threatened to destroy everything the Elder's ancestor had built. The crops withered in the fields, the Brahmin grew thin and weak, and the people began to whisper that perhaps the spirits had abandoned them. It was in this desperate time that the village elder, daughter of the vault dweller herself, called upon her grandchild to undertake a quest that would determine the fate of not just Arroyo, but potentially the entire wasteland. The young tribal, who would come to be known as the Chosen One, stood before the elder in the sacred tent at the heart of the village. The old woman's eyes, still sharp despite her many years, studied her grandchild with a mixture of hope and sorrow. She spoke of the Garden of Eden creation kit, a miraculous device from before the war that could restore life to the most barren land. The vault dweller had spoken of it in the stories passed down through generations, a tool that could transform desert into paradise. The elder explained that this G.E.C.K was located in Vault 13, the very place where the vault dweller had begun their own legendary journey. But there was a problem. Vault 13 had gone silent years ago, and no one knew what had become of its inhabitants. Before the Chosen One could leave on this quest, however, they would need to prove themselves worthy of such an important mission. The elder directed them to the Temple of Trials, an ancient proving ground where young warriors demonstrated their readiness to face the dangers of the wasteland. The temple, a pre-war structure that the tribe had adapted for their purposes, was filled with traps, puzzles, and dangerous creatures. The Chosen One would need to navigate its passages, defeat or avoid the giant ants and other threats within, and retrieve the sacred mask from its depths. Only then would they be considered ready to venture beyond the safety of Arroyo's borders. The Temple of Trials tested every aspect of the Chosen One's abilities. Sharp spikes hidden beneath sand could impale the unwary, while pressure plates triggered swinging blades that could cleave a person in two. The giant ants that infested the deeper chambers were aggressive and venomous, their mandibles capable of crushing bone. Yet the Chosen One persevered, using combat skills learned from the village's warriors, or perhaps employing stealth and cunning to bypass the deadliest obstacles. Some chose to speak with Cameron, a fellow tribal who guarded one of the temple's passages, convincing him through words rather than violence to step aside. Others fought their way through with spear and blade, proving their martial prowess. Upon returning, with the sacred mask, the Chosen One received the elder's blessing and a few meager supplies for the journey ahead. The villagers gathered to see their champion off, some offering prayers to the spirits, others giving what little food or water they could spare. Hakunin, the village shaman and the elder's most trusted advisor, spoke of visions he had experienced in his ritual trances. He saw a great darkness spreading across the land, and within that darkness, a pale face watching. The visions troubled him, but he could not interpret their full meaning. He promised to reach out to the Chosen One through dreams, guiding them when possible, though his power to do so would be limited by distance and the strength of his connection to the spirit world. The journey from Arroyo led south and east, through terrain that grew increasingly harsh and desolate. The Chosen One traveled light, carrying only essential supplies, a spear or club from the village, and the jumpsuit that had belonged to the vault dweller, a faded blue garment with the number 13 emblazoned on the back. The first settlement encountered was Klamath, a rough frontier town that had grown up around the ruins of a pre-war city. Klamath survived through hunting, trapping, and trading, with gecko pelts being particularly valuable. The town was divided between two competing trapper families, the Duntons and Buckners, whose rivalry added tension to an already difficult existence. In Klamath, the Chosen One began to understand just how different the wider wasteland was from the simple tribal life of Arroyo. Here, people spoke of caps, the bottle caps that served as currency throughout the wastes. They discussed Brahmin drives, caravan routes, and the dangers of raiders and slavers that plagued the roads. Vic, a trader from the distant city of Vault City, was being held for debt by a woman named Metzger in a place called the Den. Many in Klamath spoke of Vic's radio, a working piece of pre-war technology that was quite rare and valuable. Some suggested that finding Vic might be worthwhile, as traders often had knowledge of distant places and might know something about Vault 13. The Golden Gecko Bar served as Klamath's social center, where trappers and hunters gathered to drink rot-gut whiskey and trade stories. Maida Buckner, the tough matriarch of the Buckner family, could often be found there, keeping a watchful eye on the Dunton brothers and their schemes. The Duntons were suspected of sabotaging their competitors' trapping lines and stealing pelts, but proving it was another matter entirely. The Chosen One could involve themselves in these local disputes, helping one family against another, or perhaps finding evidence of the Duntons' wrongdoing to present to the local authorities, such as they were. Beyond the town proper lay Trapper Town, a collection of shacks and tents where the less prosperous trappers made their homes. Here, the Chosen One could learn the basics of gecko, hunting and skinning, skills that would prove useful throughout the wasteland. Geckos came in several varieties, the common golden gecko being relatively easy prey, while the tougher silver geckos posed more of a challenge. For those with the courage and skill, there were rumors of a rat god in the caves beneath an old, toxic waste dump, a massive, mutated rodent that some trappers whispered was intelligent and malevolent. The journey continued to the Den, a lawless settlement that made Klamath look civilized by comparison. The Den had grown up around the ruins of several pre-war buildings, and it operated as a haven for every sort of criminal enterprise. Slavers conducted their business openly here, raiders fenced stolen goods, and jet addicts stumbled through the streets in various states of withdrawal or intoxication. The town was controlled by two competing mob bosses, Metzger, who ran the slaver operation, and Tyler, who controlled most of the other criminal enterprises. Between them, they had carved up the Den's underworld, and anyone who wanted to survive here learned quickly which boss controlled which territory. Metzger's establishment was impossible to miss, a fortified building where slaves were kept in pens like animals, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. The practice was despicable, but it was also profitable, and in the wasteland, profit often trumped morality. Metzger himself was a brutal man who had built his empire on the suffering of others. He held Vic in his debt, claiming the trader owed him 2,000 caps for various goods and services. To free Vic, the Chosen One would need to either pay this sum, find some way to eliminate Metzger and his guards, or perhaps discover an alternative solution through cunning or stealth. Vic, when finally encountered, proved to be a nervous but knowledgeable man who had traveled extensively throughout the wasteland. His radio was indeed a remarkable piece of equipment, maintained and modified with considerable skill. More importantly, Vic knew about Vault 13. He explained that he had been to Vault City, a settlement founded by the inhabitants of Vault 8, and they might have information about the location of Vault 13. However, he warned that Vault City was not welcoming to outsiders. They were isolated, xenophobic, and obsessed with maintaining genetic purity and pre-war knowledge. Getting information from them would require either becoming a citizen, which was nearly impossible for outsiders, or finding some other means of persuasion. The den also contained several other points of interest. Mom's Diner served as a front for Tyler's operations, where information could be bought and sold alongside stale Nuka-Cola and mysterious meat. The church, run by a man who claimed to be spreading the word of a higher power, was actually a cover for yet another criminal enterprise. Addicts could be found throughout the den, particularly around the areas where Jet was sold. Jet, a powerful stimulant that provided a temporary boost to perception and action points, was also highly addictive and slowly destroyed the user's body and mind. The drug had been developed by a man named Mordino in the city of New Reno, and it had spread throughout the wasteland like a plague. Among the more interesting characters in the den was Smitty, a mechanic who ran a chop shop and could perform modifications on cars if one could find a working vehicle. He spoke of a car in the desert to the east, an old Chrysalis highwayman that might still be operational if one could acquire a replacement fuel cell controller. For someone planning to travel extensively across the wasteland, having a working vehicle would be invaluable, cutting travel time dramatically and providing protection from random encounters with raiders and hostile creatures. The path to Vault City led through increasingly civilized territory, though civilization in the wasteland was always relative. Along the way, the Chosen One might encounter Modoc, a farming community that prided herself on being the agricultural heart of the region. Modoc's problems were more subtle than those of Klamath or the Den. The town's main concern was a young couple, Cornelius and Farrell, whose romance had caused a feud between their families. The Dunton-Buckner rivalry in Klamath was nothing compared to the hatred between the farming families of Modoc, where disputes over water rights and land could turn deadly. Modoc's other crisis involved their Brahmin, the two-headed cattle that served as the wasteland's primary livestock. The Brahmin had been dying mysteriously, threatening the town's economy and food supply. Investigation revealed that the deaths were connected to underground tunnels, where a tragic accident years before had left a man named Carl trapped in an old cold storage facility. Malnourished and desperate, Carl had resorted to capturing and slaughtering Brahmin that fell through weak spots in the tunnel ceilings. The discovery of Carl presented a moral dilemma. He was clearly insane from years of isolation and hunger, but he was also a murderer who had devastated Modoc's economy. The Chosen One could choose to kill him, try to bring him back to town for justice, or perhaps show mercy and help him escape to live out his remaining days elsewhere. Vault City finally loomed ahead, its gleaming walls and organized streets a stark contrast to the chaotic settlements the Chosen One had visited thus far. The city was built around Vault 8, and its inhabitants prided themselves on maintaining pre-war standards of civilization, medicine, and technology. They had clean water, advanced medical facilities that could cure nearly any disease or injury, and even holodisks containing vast libraries of pre-war knowledge. However, this prosperity came with a dark side. Vault City's citizenship was restricted to Vault descendants and a few carefully selected outsiders who proved themselves exceptional. Everyone else was relegated to the courtyard outside the walls, treated as second-class citizens, servants, or worse. First Citizen Lynette ruled Vault City with an iron grip wrapped in a velvet glove of bureaucratic procedure. She was convinced of Vault City's moral and genetic superiority, viewing outsiders as little better than savages who needed to be civilized or contained. Getting an audience with her required patience and persistence, or perhaps finding someone within the city who could intercede. Councillor McClure represented a more moderate faction, concerned that Vault City's isolationism would eventually doom them. He believed that the city needed to engage more with the outside world, forming alliances and trade relationships rather than hiding behind their walls. The courtyard outside Vault City's walls was home to hundreds of people who served the city in various capacities without enjoying citizenship rights. Among them was a ghoul named Gordon, whose presence Lynette barely tolerated. Ghouls, humans who had been transformed by massive radiation exposure into hairless, leathery beings, faced discrimination throughout the wasteland, and Vault City's prejudice was particularly virulent. Despite this, Gordon maintained his optimism and worked as a prospector, trading salvage and ore with the city. Within Vault City, the Chosen One could access the library and search the central computer for information about Vault 13. The records revealed troubling information. Vault 13 had been abandoned some years ago, with the inhabitants mysteriously disappearing. The computer's last recorded contact with the vault mentioned something about wildlife, but the details were vague and unsettling. The records did provide coordinates for the vault's location, however, allowing the Chosen One to continue their quest. Before leaving Vault City, the Chosen One might become embroiled in the city's political situation. To the north lay G.E.C.K, a town populated entirely by ghouls who lived in the ruins around an old nuclear power plant. Vault City and G.E.C.K had an uneasy relationship. The power plant provided electricity to Vault City, but Lynette made no secret of her desire to see the ghouls gone. The plant was old and leaking radiation, poisoning G.E.K.'s groundwater, but the ghouls lacked the technical knowledge to repair it properly. A skilled diplomat might broker a deal where Vault City's technical expertise was traded for a guarantee of continued power supply and improved relations. Alternatively, someone more mercenary might help Vault City sabotage the plant, driving the ghouls away and allowing the city to seize the facility. The journey to Vault 13 took the Chosen One through the wasteland's harsh interior, past the ruins of old cities and through territories controlled by various factions. Along the way, they might encounter a structure called the Ghost Farm, where a family of settlers had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind only their possessed crops and the eerie silence of an abandoned homestead. Strange, transparent creatures that seemed almost spectral haunted the farm, and the truth behind their origin was both scientific and tragic. Finally, the Chosen One arrived at Vault 13, the legendary vault where the Vault Dweller had emerged so many years ago to save the world from the Master and his super mutant army. The vault's massive door stood open, revealing the darkened corridors beyond. As the Chosen One descended into those familiar halls that their grandmother had described so many times, they sensed immediately that something was very wrong. The vault was not empty, but neither was it inhabited by humans. The Deathclaw civilization and expanding horizons. The corridors of Vault 13 echoed with sounds that were distinctly inhuman, the scrape of claws on metal, guttural communication that was part growl and part language, and beneath it all, an unmistakable sense of organization and intelligence. The Chosen One proceeded carefully through the vault's entrance, noting that while the facility showed signs of habitation, it was not by the humans who had once called this place home. The walls bore scratch marks at heights no human could reach, and the lighting had been adjusted to dimmer settings, as though the current inhabitants preferred darkness. The first Deathclaw encountered within the vault proper nearly sent the Chosen One fleeing back to the surface. Deathclaws were legendary throughout the wasteland, terrifying creatures created before the war through genetic manipulation and radiation exposure. Standing over 9 feet tall with rippling muscles, razor-sharp claws that could disembowel a Brahmin with a single swipe, and hides tough enough to stop most bullets, Deathclaws were apex predators that even experienced wasteland survivors feared. A single Deathclaw could wipe out entire raider gangs or slaughter a caravan in minutes. The idea of an entire vault full of them should have been a death sentence. But this Deathclaw did not attack. Instead, it spoke. The words were rough, formed by a throat not designed for human speech, but they were unmistakably words. The creature identified itself as a guardian of the pack and demanded to know the Chosen One's purpose in entering their home. This impossible moment, holding a conversation with one of the wasteland's most feared predators, marked a turning point in understanding what had happened to Vault 13. Deeper within the vault, the Chosen One discovered the truth. These Deathclaws were not ordinary beasts, but the results of an experiment conducted by the Enclave, the remnants of the pre-war United States government. Using advanced technology and the research notes from the Master's own attempts to create super mutants, the Enclave had enhanced these Deathclaws with increased intelligence, giving them the capacity for language, complex thought, and social organization. The experiment had been deemed a failure when the Deathclaws proved too independent and were subsequently abandoned here in Vault 13 after the original human inhabitants had been relocated. The Deathclaw pack had organized themselves into a functional society within the vault. They had a leader, Gruthar, whose intelligence and wisdom surpassed even the Enclave's expectations. Gruthar spoke eloquently about his people's situation, how they had been created as weapons but desired to live peacefully, how they had been abandoned by their creators and now simply wished to exist without persecution. He explained that they had not harmed the human inhabitants they found here, instead helping them relocate to Vault 8, Vault City, before claiming this place as their sanctuary. However, the pack faced a crisis of their own. The Enclave had not completely abandoned their experiment. Recently, armed forces had attacked the vault, killing many Deathclaws and kidnapping several others, including Gruthar's mate. The survivors lived in fear of another assault, knowing that their enhanced intelligence made them valuable test subjects or perhaps threats that the Enclave wanted eliminated. Gruthar asked the Chosen One for help, if they could locate where the captured Deathclaws had been taken and rescue them. The pack would be eternally grateful. The G.E.C.K itself was still within the vault, stored in the Level 3 storage facility, just as the Vault Dwellers' stories had suggested. However, simply taking it and leaving felt wrong now. These intelligent beings were using Vault 13 as their home, and they had not stolen the G.E.C.K, but merely been living alongside it, not understanding its significance. Gruthar, upon learning of Arroyo's plight, showed compassion that few humans might have demonstrated. He freely gave the G.E.C.K to the Chosen One, asking only that they remember the Deathclaw pack and their dream of living peacefully. Yet the G.E.K's acquisition did not complete the quest. The device came with no instructions, no manual, and examining it revealed that it was far more complex than the simple stories had suggested. It would require someone with considerable technical knowledge to activate and deploy properly. Moreover, the journey to obtain it had revealed a larger conspiracy at work. The Enclave's involvement with the Deathclaws was just one piece of a puzzle that seemed to involve the entire wasteland. Before returning to Arroyo, the Chosen One decided to investigate further, particularly the rumors about the Enclave that various NPCs had mentioned. The trail led to a military base, the remains of the Mariposa facility, where the Master had conducted his super mutant experiments decades ago. The base was now occupied by Enclave forces, who were conducting new experiments in the ancient laboratories. Breaking into the facility revealed horror upon horror. captured wastelanders being subjected to biological experiments, advanced power armor technology far beyond anything seen elsewhere in the wasteland, and references to something called Project Salvation being conducted at an oil rig off the coast. The scope of the quest expanded beyond saving Arroyo. The Enclave represented a threat to the entire wasteland, with resources and technology that dwarfed any other faction. Their experiments suggested they viewed wastelanders as contaminated specimens, suitable only for study or disposal. Finding a way to stop them would require allies, considerable resources, and information. The search for allies led to New Reno, the biggest city the Chosen One had yet encountered. New Reno had survived the apocalypse by virtue of being overlooked, and in the years since, it had rebuilt itself into a haven of vice and violence. 4 crime families controlled the city: the Mordinos, who had created and distributed Jet, the Wrights, who ran legitimate businesses alongside their criminal enterprises, the Bishops, who controlled prostitution and information gathering, and the Salvatores, who had recently acquired advanced energy weapons from an unknown source. New Reno was a city of opportunities for those willing to compromise their principles. Made men, enforcers for the families, stalked the streets in their distinctive suits, while prostitutes beckoned from the doorways of the Shark Club and Cat's Paw. The Desperado Casino offered gambling and entertainment, while the Jungle Gym provided boxing matches where spectators bet on fighters, sometimes to the death. It was a place where caps flowed freely, and information could be bought for the right price. The Mordino family proved central to several plot threads. Big Jesus Mordino had built his empire on jet production, but his son, Little Jesus, was proving to be a liability with his own addiction and erratic behavior. The Mordinos controlled the stables, where jet was manufactured using Brahmin dung and a secret chemical catalyst. They also had connections to slave traders and other unsavory operations. Working for the Mordinos often meant getting one's hands very dirty, but it also provided access to the city's underworld and information networks. The Wright family, in contrast, maintained a veneer of respectability. Mr. Wright ran legitimate casinos and bars while quietly engaging in the same criminal activities as the other families. His tragedy was the murder of his son, Richard Wright, whose killer had never been identified. Mr. Wright was consumed by the need for vengeance, but he was also intelligent enough to know that accusing the wrong family without proof could trigger a war that would destroy New Reno. A thorough investigation revealed that Richard had been killed by the Salvatores as part of a conspiracy involving the Bishops, a complex plot to eliminate rivals while framing another family. The Bishop family's operation was the most insidious. They ran prostitution rings, but they also gathered intelligence. Angela Bishop, who managed the family's espionage operations behind a facade of running the brothels, was actually conducting reconnaissance for the Enclave. The connection between a New Reno crime family and the shadowy government remnant revealed how deeply the Enclave's influence penetrated wasteland society. The Bishops had been feeding information about various factions and settlements to the Enclave in exchange for protection and future promises of power. The Salvatore family's recent acquisition of laser weapons pointed to another Enclave connection. Mason, the Salvatore's arms dealer, had been making regular trips to meet with an Enclave contact who supplied advanced weapons in exchange for information and services. Following this thread provided another piece of the puzzle about the Enclave's location and plans. The oil rig off the coast was slowly being mapped through these various intelligence sources. New Reno's underworld extended beyond the 4 families. The Corsican brothers ran a smaller operation specializing in more discreet criminal services. Jules, an arms dealer, could provide weapons and ammunition to anyone with the caps, no questions asked. Eldridge, the new Reno Arms proprietor, sold everything from pistols to rocket launchers, catering to the city's constant demand for weaponry. The city was a powder keg, held in check only by the family's mutual realization that all-out war would be unprofitable for everyone. The San Francisco Alliance and Enclave confrontation. The journey westward toward the coast brought the Chosen One to San Francisco, a city that had rebuilt itself around the remains of the old pre-war metropolis. Unlike New Reno's organized crime or Vault City's xenophobia, San Francisco was a place of diverse factions living in uneasy coexistence. The city was divided between several groups, each with their own agenda, and each potentially useful in the coming confrontation with the Enclave. The Shi, descendants of a Chinese submarine crew that had been stranded after the nuclear war, controlled a significant portion of San Francisco. They had preserved much of their pre-war knowledge and culture, creating a technologically advanced enclave that rivaled Vault City in sophistication. The Shi Emperor, actually an advanced computer that integrated the personalities and knowledge of previous Shi leaders, guided the community with calculated precision. Ken Lee served as the Emperor's mouth, translating its decisions and directives to the people. The Shi were interested in acquiring a chemical called vertibird plans from the Hubologists, another faction in the city, and would trade valuable technology and alliance for assistance. The Hubologists were a cult that had existed before the war, but had grown significantly in the apocalypse's aftermath. They believed in achieving a higher state of existence through spiritual cleansing and following the teachings of their founder, whose pre-war identity was suspiciously similar to a certain infamous science fiction writer. The Hubologists had infiltrated many aspects of San Francisco society, and they possessed a partially functional space shuttle that they intended to use to reach their promised land among the stars. Their leader, AHS-9, was charismatic and utterly convinced of the Hubologists' destiny, though whether he was a true believer or a charlatan was difficult to determine. The Brotherhood of Steel maintained an outpost in San Francisco, though this chapter of the famous organization was struggling. The Brotherhood, dedicated to preserving and controlling pre-war technology, had once been a major power in the wasteland. But years of isolationism and conflicts with the Enclave had weakened them significantly. Matthew, the leader of this Brotherhood chapter, was desperate for any information about Enclave activities and gladly offered the Brotherhood's support in exchange for intelligence about the oil rig and the Enclave's plans. The tanker, a massive pre-war oil vessel that sat in San Francisco's harbor, became central to the Chosen One's plans. This ship represented the only practical way to reach the Enclave's oil rig headquarters, but it had not been operational for over a century. The ship's computer systems, navigation equipment, and fuel systems would all need to be repaired or replaced. The Shuri possessed much of the necessary technology, while the Hubologists controlled other key components. Playing these factions against each other, or finding ways to satisfy all their demands, became a delicate diplomatic dance. While gathering the components needed to repair the tanker, the Chosen One learned more about the Enclave's ultimate plan. It was called Project Salvation, and it was genocidal in scope. The Enclave had developed a modified version of the FEV virus, the forced evolutionary virus that the Master had once used to create super mutants. This new strain would be released into the atmosphere using an old military installation, and it was designed to kill anyone with significant radiation exposure or genetic mutation. In other words, it would exterminate virtually every human, ghoul, and mutant in the wasteland, leaving only the pure humans of the Enclave alive to repopulate the world. The horror of this revelation made allies of former enemies. The G.E.C.K, despite their isolation, recognized that the Enclave's plan threatened them as well. The Brotherhood of Steel, which had been fighting a losing battle against Enclave forces for years, finally had a concrete target. Even some of the new Reno families, when they learned that the Enclave viewed them as contaminated specimens to be eliminated, proved willing to offer resources. The wasteland, always fractious and divided, began to unite against a common existential threat. Repairing the tanker required several major components. The navigation computer needed either extensive repair or replacement with compatible parts from the G.E.C.K. The fuel system needed a specific type of nuclear fuel cell that only the Brotherhood possessed, though they required proof of the Enclave threat before they would release such a valuable resource. The ship's vertibird, a small vertical takeoff aircraft stored in the hold, needed maintenance that required schematic that the hubologists had stolen from an Enclave facility. Each component represented a quest unto itself, involving negotiation, trade, theft, or violence, depending on the chosen one's approach. The G.E.C.K offered a particularly interesting quest. They had been experimenting with their own bioweapons research, attempting to develop something that could target the Enclave specifically based on their genetic markers. However, their progress had stalled, and they needed access to Enclave genetic material to continue. This meant infiltrating an Enclave facility, acquiring tissue samples, and returning them without being caught or killed. The Chosen One could accomplish this through various means, from stealth missions to conducting an all-out assault, depending on their skills and resources. During this time, Hakunen's dream visions became more frequent and more disturbing. The shaman reached out across the miles, his spirit finding the Chosen One in their sleep. His messages spoke of Arroyo's worsening condition, how the drought had intensified and people were beginning to die. But more than that, he warned of the pale face he had seen in his visions, how it was connected to Arroyo's fate in ways he could not fully understand. These dreams added urgency to an already desperate situation. The Chosen One needed to stop the Enclave and return home with the G.E.C.K before it was too late. The discovery that the Enclave had been abducting villagers from Arroyo added a personal dimension to the conflict. While investigating Enclave operations on the mainland, the Chosen One learned that their entire village had been taken, transported to the oil rig for experimentation as part of the project. Salvation testing phase. The Enclave was using Arroyo's people as test subjects to refine their virus, measuring how quickly it killed and whether anyone showed immunity. This transformed the mission from saving the world to saving family, friends, and everyone the Chosen One had ever known. Finally, the tanker was ready. The massive ship, silent for over 100 years, roared to life as its nuclear engines engaged. The Brotherhood of Steel contributed a squad of paladins in power armor to serve as shock troops. The G.E.C.K provided advanced weapons and medical supplies. Even some of the San Francisco gangs and factions contributed fighters, viewing this as a chance to strike a blow against the force that had been secretly manipulating their city for years. The assembled force was impressive by wasteland standards, though whether it would be sufficient against the Enclave's advanced technology remained to be seen. The journey across the Pacific to the oil rig took hours, with the tanker cutting through dark waters under a gray sky. The oil rig loomed ahead, a massive structure that had served as a deep-water drilling platform before the war and now functioned as the Enclave's last stronghold. Vertibirds circled the platform like mechanical vultures, and the Chosen One could see soldiers in advanced power armor patrolling the landing pads. The Enclave had clearly been expecting eventual retaliation, though whether they anticipated an attack of this scale was unclear. The assault on the oil rig became the stuff of wasteland legend. The tanker's arrival was not subtle. and the Enclave responded with overwhelming force. Vertibirds strafed the deck, while soldiers in power armor rained plasma fire down on the attackers. The Brotherhood Paladins formed a defensive perimeter while the Chosen One and a small strike team fought their way into the facility's interior. Every corridor was a battle, every junction point a potential ambush. The Enclave's technology was superior, but they had grown arrogant after years of facing only scattered resistance. They had not anticipated such a coordinated assault, nor such determination. Inside the oil rig's research levels, the Chosen One found the captured villagers from Arroyo. They were imprisoned in cells, subjected to various experiments and tests. Many were sick, some dying from exposure to experimental strains of the virus. The sight fueled a rage that carried the Chosen One through increasingly desperate firefights. Freeing the prisoners became the first priority, even as the strike team pushed toward the oil rig's command center and the source of the FEV virus threat. The confrontation with President Dick Richardson, the Enclave's leader, revealed the true depths of their ideology. Richardson was completely convinced of his rightness, believing that he was saving humanity by destroying everyone contaminated by radiation. He viewed the wasteland survivors as tragic casualties, necessary sacrifices to ensure a pure future for mankind. He spoke of the old America, of restoring civilization to its pre-war glory, of his responsibility to do what was necessary no matter how terrible. His conviction was absolute, and he could not be swayed by arguments about the value of the diverse cultures and communities that had grown in the wasteland. The choice of how to stop the Enclave came down to several options. The most direct was to fight through to the reactor control systems and overload them, destroying the oil rig and everyone on it, including the Enclave leadership. A more subtle approach involved accessing the facility's computer systems and releasing counteragents that would neutralize the FEV virus before it could be deployed. There was also the option of turning the Enclave's own security systems against them, activating defensive turrets and releasing their test subjects to create chaos while the strike team escaped with the prisoners. In the oil rig's deepest laboratory levels, the Chosen One encountered Frank Horrigan, the Enclave's ultimate weapon. Horrigan had once been a Secret Service agent, but repeated exposure to FEV and cybernetic enhancements had transformed him into something barely human. Standing 12 feet tall in custom power armor, with strength that could rip a Deathclaw apart and weapons integrated directly into his body, Horrigan was nearly invincible. He was also utterly loyal to the Enclave and completely committed to their genocidal vision. The battle with Horrigan was desperate and brutal. Even with allies, power armor, and the best weapons available in the wasteland, he was almost unstoppable. The fight raged through the laboratory as Horrigan shrugged off plasma fire and explosions that would have killed normal soldiers 10 times over. Only by exploiting the environment, activating security turrets to fire on him, or perhaps convincing some of the Enclave's remaining soldiers that Horrigan had gone rogue and needed to be stopped, could he finally be brought down. His final words, expressing confusion about why the Chosen One fought against salvation, revealed that he truly believed in the Enclave's mission to his dying breath. With Horrigan defeated and the oil rig's reactor set to overload, the Chosen One led the freed prisoners and surviving allies back to the tanker. The facility shook with explosions as containment systems failed and fires spread through the installation. Enclave soldiers fled in vertibirds, abandoning their posts as it became clear the oil rig was doomed. The tanker pulled away just as the reactor went critical, and the massive explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. The Enclave, the last remnant of the old United States government, was destroyed. Their genocidal plan ended before it could be enacted. The journey back to San Francisco was somber despite the victory. Many had died in the assault, and the freed prisoners from Arroyo were in poor condition after their captivity and experimentation. The wasteland had been saved from extermination, but the cost had been high. The Brotherhood of Steel Paladins spoke of how this was their greatest victory in decades, but also noted that scattered Enclave forces remained on the mainland and would need to be hunted down. The Shire welcomed the returning warriors, offering medical treatment to the wounded and celebration for the victory. San Francisco had proven itself as a power capable of projecting force beyond its borders, and the various factions began to see possibilities for a new era of cooperation. The return home and new beginning. With the Enclave destroyed and the prisoners freed, the Chosen One finally turned their attention back to the original mission that had started this entire journey. The G.E.C.K, carefully preserved throughout all the battles and travels, still held the promise of salvation for Arroyo. But the return journey revealed just how much the wasteland had changed during the Chosen One's quest. The alliances forged during the fight against the Enclave had created new trade routes and diplomatic relationships. Settlements that had once barely communicated now exchanged caravans and information regularly. The path homeward took the Chosen One through familiar territories, but they saw them with new eyes. Vault City had begun, grudgingly, to open its borders slightly more, particularly after Councillor McClure used the Enclave crisis to argue that isolationism was no longer viable. The relationship with G.E.C.K had improved, with Vault City technicians working alongside Ghoul engineers to properly maintain the power plant. First Citizen Lynette remained as xenophobic as ever, but her power had been somewhat diminished by the shifting political landscape. The crisis had proven that Vault City could not stand alone against threats like the Enclave, and that reality had forced concessions. New Reno continued its chaotic existence, though the power balance between the families had shifted. The Mordino family had been weakened by the revelation of their Enclave connections, with several other families viewing them as traitors for collaborating with forces that wanted to exterminate all wastelanders. The Wright family had grown in influence, particularly as Mr. Wright finally had closure about his son's murder and could focus on consolidating power. The Bishops had been exposed as Enclave informants, leading to a bloody purge that left the family barely clinging to existence. The Salvatoris, having lost their supply of energy weapons with the Enclave's destruction, scrambled to maintain their position through other means. Modoc's Brahmin herds had recovered after the underground tunnels were sealed, and Carl's fate was decided. The town's feuding families had even managed to find some measure of peace, united by the need to help feed the various communities that had sent fighters to join the assault on the oil rig. Cornelius and Farrell, the young couple whose romance had caused such strife, had become symbols of hope, showing that old grudges could be set aside for the greater good. The farms produced more than ever, with new irrigation techniques shared by Vault City helping to maximize crop yields. The den remained a haven for criminals, but even there, changes were evident. Metzger's slaving operation had been severely disrupted when word spread about the Enclave's plan to exterminate wastelanders regardless of their status. Many of his customers and suppliers had participated in the assault on the oil rig, and the shared experience had created unexpected bonds. Slavery would never disappear completely from the wasteland, human nature being what it was, but the practice had become more controversial and less openly conducted. Tyler's criminal empire adapted, as it always had, finding new opportunities in the changing landscape. Klamath's trappers spoke of increased ghoul and deathclaw activity in the regions around Vault 13, with the intelligent Deathclaw pack beginning to establish trade, relationships with nearby settlements. Gruther's dream of peaceful coexistence was slowly becoming reality, though many wastelanders still feared death claws on instinct and tensions remained high. The pack had begun teaching some of their young to read and write using materials salvaged from Vault 13, and there were rumors that they were developing their own unique culture that blended their predatory nature with newly acquired intellectual capabilities. As the Chosen One approached Arroyo with the freed villagers and the G.E.C.K, they found the village in dire condition. The drought had intensified during their absence, and many of the fields were completely barren. The Brahmin pens stood mostly empty, with only a few skeletal animals remaining. The village's population had already been reduced by the Enclave's abduction, and among those who remained, malnutrition and disease were rampant. Hakunin, the shaman who had reached out through dreams, had died just days before the Chosen One's return, his spirit finally unable to sustain the connection across such vast distances, while his body wasted from lack of food and water. The elder, though weakened by hunger and grief over Hakunin's death, met her grandchild with tears of joy and relief. She had maintained hope even as others despaired, believing in the Vault Dweller's legacy and trusting that the Chosen One would succeed where others might have failed. The reunion between the freed villagers and those who had remained in Arroyo was emotional, with families torn apart by the Enclave's raid finally whole again. But celebration would have to wait. The village was dying, and only the G.E.C.K could save it now. The activation of the Garden of Eden creation kit was a moment of both wonder and uncertainty. The device, when properly configured using the technical knowledge gained from Vault City scientists and Brotherhood engineers, began its programmed sequence. Nanomachines spread from the device in an invisible cloud, analyzing the soil composition, water table depth, and environmental conditions. Seeds stored in microscopic suspension were released and planted according to optimal agricultural patterns determined by pre-war algorithms. Underground water sources were tapped and channeled through newly created irrigation systems that assembled themselves at the molecular level. The transformation was not instantaneous, despite the legends that had been told about the G.E.C.K. Over the course of several days, green shoots began to emerge from soil that had been barren for months. The irrigation channels filled with clean water, pumped from deep aquifers that conventional digging could never have reached. Trees that would normally take years to mature grew at accelerated rates as the G.E.K.'s nanomachines optimized their cellular structure and provided nutrients directly to their roots. Within a week, Arroyo was surrounded by fields of growing crops, orchards bearing fruit, and grasslands where Brahmin could graze again. The elder watched the transformation with wonder, seeing the stories her mother, the Vault Dweller, had told made manifest. She declared a great celebration, inviting representatives from all the communities that had helped in the fight against the Enclave. The festival that followed was unlike anything Arroyo had seen before, with traders from Vault City and G.E.C.K, Brotherhood paladins still wearing their power armor, scientists curious about the G.E.C.K's technology, trappers from Klamath, farmers from Modoc, and even a few carefully supervised New Reno, made men who claimed they wanted to pay their respects. During the celebration, the elder formally named her grandchild as her successor, and the true Chosen One, whose deeds would be remembered for generations. She spoke of how the quest had begun as a simple mission to save one village, but had grown into something far greater, the unification of disparate communities against an existential threat, the exposure and destruction of the Enclave's genocidal plan, and the forging of alliances that would shape the wasteland's future. The Chosen One had not just saved Arroyo. but had fundamentally altered the course of post-apocalyptic civilization. The various faction representatives who attended the celebration each had their own perspectives on recent events and their implications for the future. The Brotherhood of Steel Scribes spoke excitedly about the Enclave technology they had salvaged from the oil rig, including partial schematic for advanced power armor and energy weapons that would take years to fully understand. They also expressed interest in studying the G.E.C.K, though the Chosen One made it clear that Arroyo's salvation device was not available for experimentation. The Brotherhood accepted this with good grace, recognizing that their alliance with the tribal village was more valuable than any single piece of technology. The Shu delegation, led by one of Ken Lee's lieutenants, discussed possibilities for establishing permanent trade relationships with Arroyo and the other inland communities. San Francisco had resources and technology, but it needed food, raw materials, and trade goods that the agricultural settlements could provide. They proposed a caravan route that would connect San Francisco to Vault City, Modoc, and Arroyo, with regular shipments traveling under armed guard to discourage raiders. The economic integration this would create could transform the region's prosperity. Representatives from Vault City, sent reluctantly by First Citizen Lynette, but carrying surprisingly conciliatory messages, acknowledged that Arroyo had proven itself worthy of respect. They offered medical supplies and technical assistance in setting up a basic clinic that could treat common wasteland ailments. In exchange, they hoped to study the effects of the G.E.C.K's transformation on the local environment and perhaps gain insights into pre-war terraforming technology. The offer was carefully worded to avoid seeming condescending, a significant departure from Vault City's usual attitude toward tribal communities. Even the intelligent Death Claws sent an emissary, a young pack member named Gorris, who had learned to communicate particularly well with humans. Gorris spoke of his pack's gratitude for the Chosen One's help in rescuing the captured members from the Enclave, and expressed hope that the growing acceptance of intelligent Death Claws would continue. He also brought a warning that not all Death Claws had been enhanced with intelligence, and the regular savage variants still posed significant dangers throughout the wasteland. His presence at the celebration, initially causing alarm among those not familiar with the Vault 13 pack, ultimately served as a powerful symbol of how much the wasteland was changing. The celebration lasted 3 days, with the various communities sharing their cultures, stories, and hopes for the future. Tribal dancers from Arroyo performed ancient rituals passed down through generations, while the Brotherhood paladins demonstrated their power armor's capabilities in mock combat displays that amazed the onlookers. G.E.C.K scientists gave lectures on pre-war technology and their vision for rebuilding civilization according to principles that balanced technological advancement with environmental sustainability. Even some new Reno entertainers, singers, and musicians provided performances that showed how culture survived and evolved, even in the harshest conditions. As the celebration wound down and the visitors prepared to return to their respective communities, the elder called the Chosen One to her private tent for a final conversation. She was old now, far older than she had any right to be given the wasteland's harsh conditions, and she knew her time was limited. She spoke of the Vault Dweller, her mother, who had saved California from the Master and his super mutant army, but had been exiled from Vault 13 for her troubles. The Vault Dweller had founded Arroyo as a refuge, a place where she could build something new away from the fear and prejudice of those who saw her as a threat. The elder reflected on how the Chosen One's journey had paralleled the Vault Dwellers in many ways, leaving home to face an existential threat, gathering unlikely allies, discovering conspiracies that threatened the entire wasteland, and ultimately confronting the source of evil in a climactic battle. But there were differences too. The chosen one had returned home a hero rather than being exiled. The various communities had united rather than turning inward with fear, and the victory had created opportunities for building something better rather than merely preventing catastrophe. She charged her grandchild with a new responsibility: to serve as Arroyo's bridge to the wider wasteland, to maintain the alliances forged in battle, and to work toward building a future where cooperation replaced conflict. The G.E.C.K had saved Arroyo's physical survival, but the village's long-term prosperity would depend on its relationships with neighboring communities. The days of pure isolation were over. The wasteland was too interconnected now, and that presented both opportunities and dangers. In the weeks following the celebration, life in Arroyo began to find a new rhythm. The G.E.C.K transformed fields required tending, but they were far more productive than anything the village had managed before. Trade caravans began arriving regularly, exchanging manufactured goods and medical supplies for food and tribal crafts. Young people from Arroyo started traveling to places like Vault City and San Francisco to learn skills that the village lacked, while traders and travelers from across the wasteland visited Arroyo out of curiosity about the legendary G.E.C.K. The chosen one found themselves in the strange position of being both a tribal leader and a wasteland diplomat. They traveled regularly between communities, mediating disputes, facilitating trade agreements, and working to maintain the fragile peace that had emerged from the Enclave crisis. It was exhausting work, requiring skills very different from the combat prowess that had served so well during the quest. But it was also rewarding, seeing communities that had once been isolated or hostile beginning to cooperate and prosper together. Vault 13's Deathclaw pack became an unexpected success story. As word spread about their intelligence and peaceful intentions, some of the fear surrounding them diminished. They established a trade relationship where they exchanged protection services, their formidable combat abilities useful in defending caravans from raiders, for food, medical supplies, and educational materials. Young Deathclaws learned to read alongside human children in some border communities, though many settlers remained deeply uncomfortable with the arrangement. Gruthar's vision of coexistence was being realized, slowly and imperfectly, but genuinely. The Brotherhood of Steel used the technology salvaged from the Enclave to significantly upgrade their capabilities. New suits of advanced power armor were constructed based on the Enclave designs, but modified to be less resource-intensive to produce. Energy weapons became more common among Brotherhood ranks, and their scribes made breakthroughs in understanding pre-war computer systems and robotics. The organization began to emerge from its isolation, establishing permanent outposts in several communities and offering technological expertise in exchange for resources and support. The old policy of hoarding technology gave way to a more pragmatic approach of controlled sharing to build alliances. Vault City's evolution was perhaps the most dramatic of all. The crisis had shattered First Citizen Lynette's credibility, and while she remained in power, her authority was significantly diminished. Councillor McClure's faction gained influence, pushing for greater engagement with the outside world. The servant class in the courtyard gained some basic rights and protections, though full citizenship remained elusive for most. The relationship with G.E.C.K improved to the point where some ghouls were allowed to visit Vault City proper for medical treatment or trade, though prejudice remained deeply ingrained in the population. It would take generations for Vault City's attitudes to truly change, but the process had begun. New Reno remained chaotic and vice-ridden, but even there, subtle shifts occurred. The near-extinction event represented by the Enclave's plan had given even hardened criminals pause. The families still competed for control, but they also recognized the value of the trade networks and alliances that had formed. The city became a major hub for the new caravan routes, with goods flowing through from San Francisco to Vault City and beyond. The Wrights consolidated power and tried to bring a degree of order to the chaos, though they faced constant challenges from rivals and upstarts. Jet addiction remained a massive problem, but some communities began experimenting with treatment programs rather than simply giving up on addicts. San Francisco flourished as the wasteland's new major power. The G.E.C.K's combination of pre-war technology and post-war adaptability positioned them perfectly to lead the region's recovery. They established satellite communities, spreading their influence inland through trade and cultural exchange rather than military conquest. The Hubologists, their space shuttle dreams dashed when it became clear the vessel would never fly again, slowly faded in influence, though they maintained a dedicated core of believers. The Brotherhood outpost integrated more fully into the city's life, with paladins serving as peacekeepers and scribes working alongside G.E.C.K scientists on various projects. The smaller communities that dotted the wasteland also prospered in this new era. Modocs farms fed growing populations. Klamath's trappers ranged farther than ever, and even the Den saw a reduction in its most predatory practices. The economic integration created by regular trade meant that attacks on caravans became less common. Raiders found slim pickings when communities could call on allies for help. This wasn't a utopia by any means. Violence, crime, and hardship remained constant features of wasteland life. But conditions had improved measurably, and people began to believe that continued improvement was possible. Years passed, and the Chosen One grew into their role as both Arroyo's leader and a regional statesman. The elder eventually passed away peacefully, having seen her village transformed from a dying community into a thriving agricultural center. Her funeral brought together representatives from across the wasteland, a testament to how much had changed since the days when Arroyo was just another isolated tribal village struggling to survive. The Chosen One inherited her position officially, though they had been performing the role's duties for some time already. The next generation grew up in a wasteland that was still harsh and dangerous, but offered more opportunities than their parents had known. Children born in Arroyo could aspire to become traders traveling to distant cities, or scholars studying in Vault City or San Francisco, or even Brotherhood initiates if they showed aptitude for technology. The rigid boundaries between communities that had characterized the post-apocalyptic world were slowly dissolving, replaced by a more fluid society where people moved between settlements following opportunity or preference. The Enclave's legacy lingered in complex ways. The revelation of their plan had united the wasteland against a common enemy, creating bonds that outlasted the immediate crisis. But their technology, scattered across various groups, also created new sources of tension. The Brotherhood's monopoly on advanced equipment was challenged by sheer innovations and salvaged Enclave gear appearing in unexpected places. Questions about who should control pre-war technology and how it should be used sparked debates that would continue for decades. Some argued for open sharing of knowledge to accelerate recovery, while others feared that dangerous technologies in the wrong hands could lead to new disasters. The Intelligent Death Claws represented another complicated legacy. Gruthar's pack thrived in Vault 13 and even established a second settlement in a nearby cave system. But ethical questions abounded. Should more Deathclaws be enhanced with intelligence? Was it moral to leave some in their savage state while uplifting others? What rights did intelligent Deathclaws possess? And how should human Deathclaw conflicts be resolved? These questions had no easy answers, and different communities approached them in different ways. The pack itself simply tried to live peacefully, while advocating for acceptance and understanding. The G.E.C.K's successful deployment inspired expeditions to find other such devices. Rumors circulated about other vaults that might contain G.E.Ks, leading to dangerous treasure hunts through unexplored territories. Some expeditions found only empty vaults stripped by previous scavengers. Others discovered vaults whose experiments had created horrors best left sealed away. But a few struck gold, recovering G.E.Ks that were used to terraform other regions, spreading pockets of fertility across the wasteland. Each transformed area became a new center of settlement and agriculture, slowly reclaiming the world from the desert. Trade networks expanded into territories previously considered too dangerous or remote to access. The Chosen One helped establish a northern route connecting to communities near the former Oregon and Washington states, bringing new factions into the regional alliance. To the east, expeditions made contact with settlements near the former Nevada and Utah borders, discovering that they too had been developing their own societies and technologies in isolation. The wasteland was bigger than anyone had imagined, with thousands of communities, each adapting to their local conditions in unique ways. Religious and philosophical movements emerged from the shared experience of facing extinction. Some groups interpreted the Enclave crisis as proof of humanity's inherent goodness, arguing that the various factions' willingness to unite against evil showed that cooperation was possible. Others saw it as evidence of humanity's inherent madness, pointing out that the Enclave had been created by the same civilization that launched the nuclear war. Tribal religions blended with pre-war philosophies, creating syncretic belief systems that tried to make sense of the apocalypse and the recovery. The Chosen One, revered as a hero, found themselves uncomfortable with the quasi-religious veneration they received in some communities. Arroyo itself continued evolving beyond its tribal roots. The G.E.C.K transformed environment attracted settlers from other communities, leading to population growth and cultural mixing. Traditional tribal practices coexisted with technological innovations brought by Vault City advisors and sure traders. The village expanded into a small town, with permanent structures replacing some of the temporary dwellings. The Chosen One worked to ensure that Arroyo's growth didn't erase its cultural identity, preserving the stories, rituals, and traditions passed down from the vault dweller while also embracing useful new ideas. The question of government occupied much of the Chosen One's time. Arroyo's traditional tribal leadership structure worked well for a small village, but struggled with the town's growing size and complexity. Vault City's authoritarian system was efficient but unjust. New Reno's competing crime families were dysfunctional, and the G.E.C.K's computer-guided leadership was alien to most wastelanders. The Chosen One experimented with a council system where representatives from different community segments, farmers, traders, crafters, warriors, advised on decisions. It was messy and slow, but it gave people a voice and helped maintain social cohesion as the population diversified. Military defense required careful attention as well. While the Enclave was gone and raider attacks had decreased, new threats emerged constantly. Mutant creatures from unexplored areas, ambitious warlords seeking to carve out territories, and conflicts between allied communities that threatened to escalate into violence. The Chosen One established a defense force that combined tribal warriors with training and equipment from the Brotherhood and Vault City. This force served not just to protect Arroyo, but also to assist allied communities and patrol the trade routes that connected the region. Education became a priority once basic survival was secured. The Vault Dwellers' teachings had always emphasized the importance of knowledge, and the Chosen One worked to establish a school in Arroyo where children could learn reading, mathematics, science, and history. Teachers came from Vault City and San Francisco, bringing curricula that balanced practical wasteland survival skills with pre-war knowledge. The goal was to create a generation that could continue building on the progress made, advancing technology and civilization while avoiding the mistakes that led to the apocalypse. The Chosen One also grappled with personal questions about their role and legacy. They had accomplished the impossible, saving Arroyo, destroying the Enclave, and helping unite the wasteland. But they were still human, still mortal, and the weight of leadership was exhausting. They wondered what would happen when they were gone. Would the alliances hold? Would Arroyo continue to prosper? Or would everything collapse back into chaos? These concerns drove them to focus on institution building and training the next generation of leaders who could carry on the work. Relationships and family life proved complicated for someone with the Chosen One's responsibilities. The constant traveling between communities, the diplomatic crises that arose without warning, and the burden of being a living legend made normal domestic life difficult. Some companions from the original quest remained close allies and friends, while others drifted away to pursue their own paths. Romance, when it occurred, was often strained by the demands of leadership and the impossibility of truly separating personal life from public duty. The wasteland itself continued to present mysteries and challenges: strange radio signals from unknown sources, unexplored vaults with unknown experiments, mutant creatures that defied explanation, and ruins that promised treasure but delivered danger. The Chosen One occasionally led expeditions to investigate these mysteries, partly out of responsibility, partly out of the adventurer's spirit that had driven the original quest. These adventures reminded them that despite all the progress made, the wasteland remained wild, dangerous, and full of surprises. As the Chosen One aged, they began to understand their grandmother, the Elder's perspective, the blend of pride in accomplishments with worry about the future, the satisfaction of seeing Arroyo thrive with the knowledge that prosperity was fragile, the joy of seeing young people full of hope with the awareness of how much could still go wrong. They worked to write down the lessons learned, creating a record that future generations could study. The story of the quest, from the Temple of Trials to the oil rig's destruction, was told and retold, becoming legend even while the participants still lived. The ultimate legacy of the Chosen One's quest was not just the survival of Arroyo or the defeat of the Enclave, but the proof that cooperation between diverse communities was possible. The wasteland would never be easy or safe. Radiation still poisoned vast areas. Mutant creatures still prowled the ruins, and human nature still led to violence and conflict. But the alliance of tribes, vaults, cities, and even intelligent deathclaws showed that the apocalypse hadn't destroyed humanity's capacity for growth, change, and hope. In the darkness of the wasteland, lights flickered, small communities working together to build something better, and that was worth fighting for.